afternoon. So when they asked me to speak today, originally I was thinking I would be in the morning, then they put me after lunch, and then I got it when they saw my presentation, because the theme of my presentation fits perfectly with after lunch. You're either at the table or you're on the menu. Just like in politics, when you talk about global economic development, national economic development, this is a contact sport. You're either on the menu or you're on the table. And this is a serious business, and that's what I'm pleased to talk to you about today. And I'm so thankful for the mayor for inviting me. It's getting me back to some things I did for 15 years before I joined NACO and focused more on county government. And I want to thank him for his leadership, because he's helped us at the national level really transform some really important policy issues, especially around the issue of criminal justice, which ties into workforce development. If over 10% of our population now has a criminal record, where are you going to get your workforce? They can't find housing, they can't find a job. It becomes a very expensive population for county governments to subsidize. The other thing I want to make sure everybody recognizes, this conference is about leadership. Each one of us will leave a legacy on this earth. It's either going to be negative or it's going to be positive, but you will have a legacy as a leader. And so regions and communities are the same way. Communities and regions also have legacies, and they need to be nurtured, they need to be shaped, and they just can't be taken for granted. So today we're going to talk about this issue of Region Smart. Not to criticize previous speakers, but not one person talked about what the word smart means and why the team probably used the word smart. Smart just isn't a new buzzword. Smart is a new way of life. And as I get into my presentation, you will see the regions across the country that are progressing at rapid exponential rates have focused on smart. Smart is the integration and breaking down of silos. Those communities, those industries that are transforming their areas are working smart. That means being multidisciplinary, focusing on data. Data is king, but to have more informed decision making. So, also want to give you a little bit of background. I'm just not some guy from DC. That's usually one knock against me, but I grew up in upstate New York, which most people aren't very familiar with. But upstate New York is where GE was founded, Xerox, Bausch & Lomb, IBM, Carrier, Kodak, and most of those industries are gone and those companies are gone. Some are coming back. In the 80s and 90s, they went offshore. Now they're actually coming back. And so I've lived through the transformation of these communities, and even our family, of not selling stock at the right time. So I come to it with a very personal knowledge of what happens when you have a leadership vacuum. So I'm going to try and be a little bit inspirational. And I think this region, just driving around, I've been coming here for 20 years, and just seeing the change here is really invigorating. It's really exciting to see what is happening. But if there's one thing you take away, and the private sector folks know this, we live in an exponential era. You either disrupt yourself or you'll be disrupted by somebody else. There's no such thing as status quo. You're going backwards or forwards. You're not standing still. Rosabeth Kanter, who's out of Harvard and really mentors a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs, also understands for businesses, but also for communities. If you don't have a vision, if you don't have a roadmap, how do you know where you're going? If you're not planning the work and working the plan, what are you doing? You're wasting resources, you're wasting time, and you're probably not going to be as efficient and productive as you could be. One of the most controversial business leaders, Jeff Bezos, if you've ever read his book, I encourage you to read it. It's about the power of those that tell you no, just not listening to, and just keep marching on. And his company is transforming commerce. Yes, he's controversial, but if you see what's happening in the copycats, it's pretty impressive. So what I'm going to talk to you about is global forces shaping new trends, smart places, the Mid-South economy, but really most importantly, either disrupt yourself or be disrupted by others. Going back to the previous quotes, if you remember when Toyota located in Blue Springs, Mississippi, people say Tupelo. No, it's Blue Springs, Mississippi, with a town of about 350 people. I had the pleasure of knowing a lot of the county leaders in the Regional Economic Development Group that was able to secure that facility. They beat Chattanooga, they beat West Memphis and others, and people were stunned. But there were 3 counties that came together that knew individually they couldn't compete. Very rural counties. They shared the cost of the development of the facility, the infrastructure, the industrial park. They're sharing the tax revenue. And I'll never forget one of the county commissioners who said to me, "I will lose my election for thinking regionally. I know for a fact I will be thrown out of office for pursuing this regional approach. But this is about my grandkids and their ability to live in this community and not move away from their home." That's being a statesman. And regional work, especially for elected officials, is brutal because your citizens don't elect you to work regionally. They elect you to represent a very specific geographic area. So leadership does matter in this context. So as you start to work regionally, you have to understand people's different perspectives. So the mayor here, most folks don't realize, but he runs 2 really expensive jails with 2,500 people in each jail every day. Has a lot of other social service costs that I can promise you are probably growing his budget faster than inflation. So when you run a city or a county, we're the social safety net, especially the counties. As the economy tanks, our service demand goes up. When the economy's doing better, our demand still is there. So elected officials, the goal is, how do you create jobs? How do you increase tax revenue to provide services back? Hopefully, we're investing in the building blocks for competitive communities, not having to focus more on the social safety net. So how do we create jobs? Mr. Smith, when he's here, could probably talk about, from a corporate perspective, especially if you're a public company, you have to drive shareholder value. It is your responsibility, especially if you're publicly traded, to increase your shareholder value. How do you do that? You lower your overhead cost. You try and produce whatever you're producing with the fewest people possible. It is not business's interest to create jobs. Business's interest is to help shareholder value, maximize profits, get a return on your investor's investment. It's not to create jobs. So as you come to the table, you really have to think about people's different perspectives. That doesn't mean individual CEOs and folks that work for corporate America don't want to create jobs. But that's not how they get hired and fired. They get hired and fired based on the bottom line. And so that's very important when you get into this multi-sector regional collaboration, recognizing the perspectives of the different people. The other thing is, when you get into regional development, there's different terms. Do they really matter? No, but I want to make a couple of points. The entry point into the economic game is community development. Those are the basic fundamental building blocks for prosperous communities. Water and sewer, schools, cost-effective airports, libraries, parks, those kind of things. Affordable housing, huge issue across this country and in Europe. Economic development, typically defined as job creation, increasing tax revenue. The last one I would really encourage you to think about is individual development. It's not about jobs, it's about wealth. And wealth comes in many forms. Wealth can be monetary, it can be financial. Wealth can be social, it can be knowledge and skills, it can be human wealth. One of the biggest things in economic development and workforce is soft skills. People not having good soft skills, let alone the technical know-how. But wealth comes in many different ways. And what we're seeing in economic development is the concentration of the wealth in fewer and fewer. Part of that goes back to the skills gap. So as you look at this community and trying to be more inclusive, wealth is going to be a really important factor. It's also very controversial. People do not like to talk about wealth because it quickly gets between the haves and the have-nots. But wealth is more than just financial, so I encourage you to think about it. So, all this change that's going on, really, if you think about it, the fall of the Iron Curtain was the beginning of a new economy. We went from 2 global economies to 1 overnight. That led to a race to the bottom for cheap labor. If you really think about it, China getting into the game started around the fall of the Iron Curtain. East meeting West, trade routes, flow of commerce, but also flow of capital, not just goods. Started with the fall of the Iron Curtain. Now we're starting to enter a next phase. And it's not a race to the bottom to be cheap. It's a race to be smart. And that's why you see corporations bringing R&D and other things back. So what are those global forces? Urbanization. The world is becoming more and more urban. It's been happening since the Industrial Revolution, but it is accelerating. And it's accelerating especially with talent. So the US has added 92 million people in the last 35 years. Country of 300 million people, we've added 95 million people in the last 35 years. Most of those folks are in urban America. Technology. If you aren't prepared for the speed of change, you will be left behind. And I'll get into that in a second. Technology is changing at such a rapid rate. Think of your smartphone. That's my mic. The technology in this phone would have cost $900,000 in the 1970s. It's $900,000 for one phone with the technology that's in here today. From Apple, you're going to pay $600 to $1,000. Their competitors, you pay $200 to $400. And it's only going to continue to accelerate. Think about apps. In 2009, there were 150,000 apps. 150,000 apps. Today, there's over 1.2 million. Apps are everywhere. Apps are king. Apps run the world. So you can't get away from it. An aging world. Some of the speakers talked about it. One of our competitive edges versus Germany, Japan, and some of the others is actually we're still a young country. And if we keep it that way, compared to some of the other industrialized nations, we'll be ahead of the game. If you read about China, one of their biggest problems is their aging. Their one-child policy is coming back to really hurt them. Now, granted, they have 1 billion people, but it's definitely hurt them. And the global connections. It's slowing down, but it's still massive. Still massive, and of course, you're the center of the world when it comes to freight. So let's go on to smart places. There's a new book out called The Smartest Places, and it really focuses on the Rust Belt and how they're transforming places like Akron, Ohio. Anybody been to Akron? They've had tough going. They were basically a tire manufacturer. For decades, they focused on making tires. Now they realize they're really a polymer hub, that they make materials. It doesn't matter what you make. You can make anything. In fact, they make most of the things moving in the world. And there's a lot of things that we're learning. The one thing I want to make a point when you talk about education, and the mayor and I have talked about this, and I know there are things going on here in this region. If your education only focuses on junior high, high school, and college, and you're not doing 0 to 5, you are way behind the game. Early childhood development is essential. The cost of training and nurturing children and young adults, if you start at junior high, high school, or technical college, you've already lost them. That's like starting to operate on a patient with cancer. When they have stage 1 and 2 cancer, you're like, don't worry about it. We'll wait till you get to stage 3, then come see us. The cost and the chance of success go down dramatically. Counties run most of the jails in this country. So just to digress, jails are typically pre-trial, not convicted yet. We see 12 million individuals a year. Some jail consultants that build our jails tell us they look at 2nd and 5th grade reading levels to determine how much beds we'll need in our jails in the future. They're looking at 2nd and 5th grade reading levels to determine what is the outcome of these people in the community. So if we're not focusing on sustaining early childhood development, especially in the summer, because it's proven 2 kids that know the same things during school with different family structures and different summer programs will start the year the next year at totally different ends. Kids without continuous learning, strong family structures, will regress so quickly during the summer, and you're starting over the next school year. So without getting too caught up into that, SMART is the future. We're starting to see a reversal of the low-cost outsourcing to companies coming back. It's just starting. The future is about connecting and connectedness. Everything is about building connections, because the best way to innovate is to share and to collaborate. The old model of taking scientists, putting them in a cubicle or a lab in isolation to just go invent are gone. My next door neighbor growing up when I was a child was the head of global research for GE. He was one of the guys that after World War II, they brought back German technology and he had to dissect it and figure out what to do in the future. He could do it in isolation in Schenectady, New York. Today, you can't do that. You have to connect all over the world. So sharing brain power is really key. What's exciting about this initiative is you have to have the private sector, academic community, nonprofits, philanthropy, and government together. The complexity of R&D now requires collaboration. And I'm sure the corporate folks here or those in bioscience will tell you the cost, the scale, the speed. Nobody can do it alone, even the largest companies. So it's really important that you share brain power across disciplines. If you go to San Diego, you'll see an intersection of the military, Qualcomm, which was a technology company, in the bioscience industry, where Qualcomm's saying, we're looking at transmitters for Band-Aids. We're looking for all sorts of things to use wireless technology for an infinite number of uses, not just cell phones. So that is the merging of different sectors. And then you've got the new marriage of minds and machines, robotics, 3D printing, the Internet of Things. Basically, the Internet of Things are just connections. It can be sensors on a road for driverless vehicles. It can be, you don't need to go to the doctor anymore. He can take your heart rate from your home. Lots of things. The key thing is it's about localized, customized, complexity and quality. People want quality, and these things are complex. And people want customized, customized, customized. So you're sitting here as a transportation and logistics hub. 3D printing would scare the hell out of me if I was at FedEx. If I can get a blueprint on something over online and make something in my house or my garage that doesn't require you to ship it from China, that all I need is materials that I can print out new shoes in my garage, I don't need to order them on Amazon, that's a whole new world. How many have been to Nike ID? You can go on Nike's website and build your own shoes. I've got the ugliest pair of basketball shoes you've ever seen. I'm a Syracuse fan. They're orange, nasty blue. They're ugly. Only wear them in my basement, never outside. But there will be a day where I build them online and I print them out in my house. There will be a day where I don't need to ship them from Amazon or Nike. It's coming. If you go to county libraries now across the country, They have 3D printers where you can go make things. County libraries all over the country have 3D printers. Workforce, as Emily said, is a resource. It is the most precious national resource, and we need to really focus on it. The last thing is quality of place. So I'm blessed to work in DC. Forget the national politics. As a community, it's been transformed in 25 years. It went from a government town that shut down at 5 o'clock to a 24/7. So I've got 80 employees, 80 colleagues that work with me. We're moving our office in a couple months. So we started looking at our workforce. Out of our 80 employees, 20 ride their bike to work. When we started looking at a new office, the builders and the realtors said they wanted to show us the physical fitness center, the gym in the building. They wanted to show us the rooftop. All these employees kept saying, I don't care about that. What's your bike storage locker look like? Do you have a unit down in the garage where we can fix flat tires and fix our chain if it breaks? They said, I don't need a gym. I ride my bike to work, I walk to work. I'm a young person that's so in debt in college, I can't buy a house, let alone a car. So both culturally, I want to ride a bike because I believe in the environment, and two, I'm so damn poor, I can't afford a car. But if you talk to Jones Lang LaSalle or any of the big real estate brokers in Chicago, Austin, DC, San Francisco, they'll tell you the same story. Where's the coffee shop and where do I park my bike? Quality of place is changing. Talent wants to be in urban settings. It's controversial. If you go to Silicon Valley, the biggest movement is they're moving from San Jose in the valley to downtown San Francisco. More expensive, but that's where people, if you want to recruit talent, you have to be thinking of quality of place. So to move things along, economic developers historically have been what we call buffalo hunters. Go out, get that last buffalo, that last big plant. Get those 5,000 jobs. The problem with that model is that historically companies existed, the average life cycle of a Fortune 500 company was 67 years. So if you went and recruited a company, you know they're going to be there for multiple lifetimes. Nowadays, the average life cycle of a corporation is 15 years. If you look at the S&P 500, Babson School of Business says by 2020, 40% of the companies in the S&P 500 will no longer be in the S&P 500. Dramatic change. So technology, we can't escape it. So if you look at some of the research that McKinsey and others have done, they say we'll have 1 trillion devices connected by 2025. We are in a connected world. If you look at driverless vehicles, one of the things that's going to take is sensors, GPS, satellites, all sorts of things constantly connected. And the speed of this technology, where it took the radio 38 years to reach 50 million people, it took Twitter like 3 seconds. If you go to China, they have 300 million people in China connected to an app called WeChat. 300 million people connected to one app. This region, I would be thinking about transportation logistics. What are autonomous vehicles going to do to all the truck drivers? What's it going to do to cab drivers? What's it going to do to delivery people? I was talking to the FedEx folks. They're looking at it. Germany is already doing it, where they have trucks that drive together, driver in the front, the guy who's in the other 18-wheeler is just sitting there, not driving. They're called tandems, and they just go together. It's here. It's not the future. And what's interesting is the companies leading the charge are Google, Apple, Microsoft, and others that are pushing this. It's not just Ford, Volvo, and the others. The same thing is going to happen in other industries. So again, going back to the theme of disrupt yourself or be disrupted by others, talked about Kodak. My stepfather, his dad, was actually the medical director for Eastman Kodak in the 50s and the 60s. They had 80,000 employees. He was the head of R&D for the company. They had their own hospital, 40,000 workers just in Rochester. They were the king. But they missed big time. Instagram, overnight, now has more value than Eastman Kodak. Overnight. You look at Airbnb. I was just with the CEO of Hilton. It was interesting to hear the global head of Hilton Hotels say, Airbnb is not a threat. I raised my hand and said, well, Hyatt, one of your competitors, and you're getting pretty close, Airbnb has a stock value now that exceeds Hyatt. How are they not a threat? If I can go on my phone and find a house that's nice that I can go stay at versus a hotel, people are doing it. All demographics are doing this. Just ask a cab driver and a limo driver what Uber has done to them. Same things happen now with jets. There's an app now for jets. There's apps for truck drivers, all sorts of things for the shared economy. So it's changing. So again, Uber is now the world's largest taxi company. They don't own one vehicle. Facebook is the most popular media owner. They create zero content. They don't create any content. Airbnb is now the world's largest accommodation provider. They don't own any real estate. So going back to connected, look at the number of connected devices and look at where we're going to be in 7 years. It is changing so quickly. How many of you have an anxiety panic attack when your battery on your phone goes out? I had one last night. I got to the hotel or the airport. I was on 1%. I'm like, how am I going to get my Uber driver without my phone? I haven't taken a cab in 4 years. I had to take a cab. Talk about anxiety. There's a personal story there. My sister almost got killed in a cab, so I try and stay away from them. But anyways, the point being, we're all connected. I'm going to skip through here in the interest of time, but when you look at the U.S. versus our global competitors, we are still the greatest nation. We're still the most competitive, despite the presidential race and the rhetoric. But our weaknesses as a country reflect this region with really the quality of education and our mounting health costs. So let me wrap up with a couple of things. We built this data set where we track all 3,069 county economies across this country. We're one of the only ones that do it. Most folks focus on the metropolitan areas. But you can go on our website and actually look at what's going on with your county economy. Since the bottom of the recession, we've been tracking urban areas, middle tier, and rural. Out of the 126 large urban counties, it wasn't until last year that one large urban county recovered fully on 4 key economic indicators: GDP, employment, unemployment, and median household income. What county do you think was the first to recover? Just state. In what state? California? Colorado? Kent County, Michigan. Grand Rapids, Michigan. The strongest economy in the country. Not population growth, but diversified, solid economic conditions. As of this year, only 17 out of the 126 large counties have fully recovered in those 4 indicators. Most of them California and Texas, although Texas with the drop in oil prices is having a little change in their conditions. So it's really interesting to see where the counties are strongest. You can go in and look at your own county. So here's Shelby County, for example. You can track how this county is doing versus its sibling peer counties. And you can see what your main economic clusters are. It's really just meant to be as a tool on how are we doing, how much progress are we making. So let me get towards the end on this whole thing of SMART. Regional collaboration and breaking down silos between the private sector, the public sector, and academic institutions is no longer an option. So any speaker that stood up here and told you it's an option, I would strongly disagree with. It's a mandate. Today's most successful communities have open, multidisciplinary, bottom-up, collaborative, and focus on quality of place. Place does matter. So just to leave you with a couple of thoughts. Again, be prepared for the speed of the world. You have to have a plan. You have to have a roadmap, and you have to work it. Building blocks are nice. You have to have parks. You have to have libraries. You have to have quality school. That doesn't guarantee success. That's your entry fee. Regional leadership has to exist because of the complexity, the speed, and the scale of what we're dealing with. The built environment matters, not only for quality of place, but for collaboration. If you look at Silicon Valley, if you look at Boston, if you look at these places, they've built physical environments that's open collaboration. Take advantage of your global firms and their international expertise. Nobody knows what's going on around the world better than FedEx. Tap into that knowledge and find out what is happening around the world. And then be resilient because it's a contact sport. So this region worked with Rockefeller Foundation, Brookings, and others on a great roadmap for the metropolitan economy. How many of you have heard of it? Not very many. It may be one of a dozen plans that this region's developed. But you need to go back and look at your plans, see if they're valid, work those plans. So if you can dream it, you can do it. And we know that leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. If you don't have a vision, how are you going to make it a reality? So with that, thank you very much.